All right. We are live back this week. Excited to be here. How are you doing, Brandon?
Well, I've got something to show off. I got myself a sweet shiner this past week with the weed eater. I was weed eating around the mulch beds and shot some mulch up into my face, a alder chip. Gave myself a black eye, but otherwise I'm great. Just had some family in
Oh,
town. Had a wonderful
yeah.
visit, and yeah, wear eye protection. I'm glad I had goggles on. Um, you know, for all the folks that make fun of me for being the PPE guy. I'm sure glad I had them on. But yeah, I had a really great visit with some family and knock on rocks. Weather's been great. And as you know, I'm working on my finishing touches on my talk for our convention in Atlanta coming up. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that's how about yourself?
Oh man, I'm swamped. Like it's so much happening right now. And then to top it off, I had a garden party today for my local garden club. So it
Oh,
was
wow.
me and like 20 women in their 70s and 80s hanging out in my garden. It's pretty
Awesome.
funny. But I have to say it's great. Like I really like connecting with the local gardening community. I wish there were more guys in there, but we'll start growing it. There were a few guys that did show up, but they all refused to get in the photo, so it was just me in the group
Oh, how
picture.
funny. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah.
I'm a garden club terrorist. I'll just show up. They can't keep me out.
Yeah, it reminded me though, because they were asking me like how I was, was I fertilizing and things like that. And I wasn't I wasn't trying to suggest they need to buy my products. But I was talking about how all I used this year in the garden was the nutrient pack, some sort of complete organic fertilizer. It doesn't have to be specific to what we make. I think they actually asked, would Dr. Earth work? And I said, yeah, absolutely. But mixing that in at the beginning of the grow cycle, I didn't soil test for my vegetable garden because I didn't want to spend the money for it. Um, but if you're not soil testing, that is a great option, especially for vegetables or something that's a little lower value crop where you don't have to have everything quite as dialed in. So I guess that was what was on my mind this morning as I was giving the garden tours because I wasn't seeing a lot of fertility, nutrient deficiencies in my garden. Um, and I think I attribute that to just, the wide range that we get in organic gardening, the ability to, we don't have to be as exact.
Yeah. I've got my fall winter garden started. Lettuces, carrots, some brassicas. Um, we don't get frost out here, maybe at all, so
Mm.
I'm gonna let stuff run. I've got for everybody that said that I can't grow okra and watermelons out here, my okra and my watermelons are crushing it right now. They're in a greenhouse, to be fair, but they're crushing it right now. So I'm really excited about that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, just yeah, this conference is right around the corner now. It just snuck up on us, and so trying to coordinate with all the speakers. We just nailed down the schedule literally last night, so I feel like we finally have that really dialed in. Um, Confirmed all the speakers, and we're just getting the titles of all the descriptions and the talks nailed down, and then yeah, I'm gonna be hitting the road next Tuesday. So actually, in reference to this show, I won't be here on Tuesday. I'll be driving out to Montana, but I think you and Ben can probably hold it down
Yep.
while I'm gone.
Yep.
And then the following week,
I thought you were leaving Wednesday or Thursday.
no, I'm leaving. I'm leaving Tuesday for the conference.
Oh, this coming week. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, I got
yeah.
confused. Never mind. Never mind.
So anyway, I'm excited. I'm gonna stop by a couple of facilities on the way, and then get out there early for this conference. So I hope to see some of you in the chat there, and yeah, I know you'll be there, Brandon, and so it'll be a lot of fun. Um, all right, looks like I see our first question, so we might as well dive into that. This is a popular topic. Um, we've talked about a lot on here, but it's worth talking about because silica is so important. Let's see where to start. So silica, as you know, it's one of the most abundant minerals on Earth. It's very important for plants because it helps with a number of different plant functions. It helps with stress resistance, and this can come in a lot of different forms, whether it's abiotic stress, like drought or heat. It also helps with biotic stress, making it harder for certain pests to penetrate the cuticle layer of the leaf. It helps translocate minerals throughout the plant to avoid toxicities, especially with micronutrients. Um, just a ton of benefits. It actually helps reduce heavy metal uptake too. So, highly recommend that everyone uses silica in their garden. It's like the one thing that is truly like I don't know. I
Everybody,
want to say like
everybody
everything's
agrees.
snake oil except for silica. Like it really is too good to be true. It is the silver bullet. There's a lot of different ways to get it, but everyone needs it. And you're probably getting some of it in your soil, in your compost, those sorts of things. But supplementing it, I think, is essential. Um, do you want to talk a little bit? I've been rambling. I can jump
Now,
back in, but do you have anything you want to add about silica?
yeah, so there's a couple of different forms. There's an amorphous form and a crystalline form. You know, it's important what forms you get into your soil if you want release in, you know, this lifetime. I've seen folks put sand, you know, different things, hoping to get silica, and that's just not going to break down. I really like to use Agsil 16. Wollastonite's great. Diatomaceous earth, you know, obviously once it gets wet, it's not going to have its pest deterrent uh, capabilities, but it can release some silica. Agsil is just so easy. It's something I do every week, and I agree totally with you. It's something that every organic grower should be doing. It's super easy. What else? Rice hulls. As long as you've got a clean source, that's go for it. But every source that I've seen so far has got high arsenic in it, so I'm a little skeptical of rice hulls. And it's just not very fast. And it's I think Rusty Nails mentioned it's, you know, great for his aeration more than the silica release, and I would agree with that. Um,
Yeah, I don't love the aeration of rice holes because I think it breaks down pretty quickly, and they're so small. I don't know that I get quite as much aeration as I really want. Um, but eggs like so Agsil 16H is potassium silicate. So when you see on a silica product, you see potassium silicate, that's what they're sourcing it from. And it's just you're getting a powdered version to make your own. So it's just a cheaper, easier way to get available silica. Um, well, last night is calcium silicate. That's a great option for folks who need to raise their pH, but don't need to raise it dramatically or quickly because it's a little slower acting than, say, agricultural lime is on pH, but it does give you silica. And then diatomaceous earth is something too that you mentioned. There is good research out there already that shows that DE can provide silica to cannabis within the same cycle that it's applied. So those are probably my first 3 options. You know, you can pay more and get like a Power SI or one of the liquid silica products, that has, oh, I can't remember the name of it now. Um, Another form of silica. So you do have options for that. Beyond that though, I would stay away from the sodium silicate products because we don't really wanna add sodium. It's not doing your plants any good, and we can get the silica attached to something like calcium or potassium, which is much better for our gardens. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next question here. Sorry, I got to go back up here. Okay, Brandon, this one's for you.
Rush, rush.
Question. Yeah, when should you use water wetter, which is essentially when should you use a surfactant with living soil? Should you do it every water or I thought there was more to that they wrote something else to go along with this question, but now I'm not seeing it. Yeah,
I
how often do you use a surfactant?
So I only use a surfactant if I am re-wetting a bed that's gone hydrophobic. Otherwise, with my normal, you know, if I've messed up somehow, or if I've done it on purpose, maybe it's between rounds and I want to go camping for a few weeks, so I put off this next round so that I don't have to worry about anything in that room. might come back and it's kind of dry. I would use a wetter spreader, some sort of surfactant, saponin at that point. But I don't do it with every watering because, I try to stay on top of my irrigation pretty tightly. And so I should have good, solution in there at all times. And so as long as it's already moist, you don't have to really use that. It's a wetter spreader breaks. Water's a polar molecule, so it wants to stick to itself. That's how you can get that bubble on a glass of water. Um, and so what you want to do is break that tension so that it can penetrate into your bed. And so surfactant will do that for you. But that's the only time
Now,
I ever need it.
correct me if I'm wrong, and or maybe I don't hold me to this, but I believe that high levels of saponins can impact microbes too,
Earthworms,
potentially.
roundworms. Yeah, if you go
Or
real
the
high.
worms?
So I don't go heavy. I just, if I use detergent, I'll use a couple of drops in a 50-gallon barrel. Like I'm not trying to get a big sudsy head on my reservoir that I'm going to pump into a bed. I just need
Yeah.
it. I just need a little bit in there. Yucca, aloe, quiaha, a little bit of Castile soap, a little bit of Dawn dish detergent, but just a little tiny bit. And it's only when I have a bed that's gone hydrophobic. Otherwise, I don't feel like you need to use it.
Okay. So only when the bed dries out too much. And even then, you don't have to use it. I've been known to just water slower versus adding a surfactant. And I'm going to get to the same place you are. It's just going to take me a lot longer to get there. I may be watering over the period of hours to days to get to that point, but you can redo it without using them. Yeah, well, this is a whole question. Jeff asks, improving flower mass, so I guess biomass and yields, and metabolites with high light intensity. Please discuss subject.
Yeah,
Um, it's a little broad. So if you
lot to
have a more
cover.
specific question, let me know. But what we do know that cannabis is a highlight plant. As we increase our par levels, as PPFD goes up, you will see an increase in yield and an increase in production of secondary metabolites. But it's not a linear relationship. It doesn't go like this. It declines. So it goes like that. So as you increase light at a certain point, you're going to get a little less yield than you would have a little lower down on the curve. And that's important to keep in mind. So what the research has shown is that, as based on what I've seen, and there could be new research out there, is around 1,000 ppfd is a pretty optimal level to target. You could go a little bit higher, and if you do that, you need to adjust your VPD and your CO2 supplementation accordingly, or you won't be maximizing your yields. Also, as you go higher in par levels, depending on the percent of red in your light, you may be more susceptible to light bleaching. So that's another thing. When you start getting up over 1,200 ppfd, you can start to see light bleaching, where the whole flower just loses chlorophyll in the top part of the bud, which doesn't damage the bud per se, but it's going to damage the ability of your ability to package and sell it because people don't like the look of it. Anything you want to add, Brandon?
It's there's a lot that we could talk about under this topic, but in general, you'll get more yield to a certain point. Like you said, there's a diminishing return with light. And then, the current research points that backing the light intensity off the last couple of weeks is important to keep those terpene levels up. So last couple of weeks, you might want to back it off.
All right, we're going to jump around a little bit here. So this relates back to the rice hulls. Chadwick shares that he had them to counter argument to what I said. He still sees plenty of rice hulls in his soils after a year and a half. I found I had some, but they were starting to break down, and the soil that I used when I used that formulation was did not drain or have nearly the porosity as the one that I used the pumice in. But it wasn't like a controlled, rigorous study or anything. That was just personal observation. So I'm not anti-rice hulls. I just personally don't choose to use them. Primarily for the arsenic, also because I just don't love the physical properties. But I know a lot of people have grown really great plants using rice hulls. So thanks for sharing that. Uh, J Bud, I can't answer this. I don't know that I know the answer to this. Maybe you can, Brandon. Does select branch pollination, where you just pollinate one branch of a female plant, affect the yield for the rest of the plant?
So anytime the plant has a mission, which is to reproduce itself and wants to make seeds, and once it, you know, I would think most of the folks in here have grown out a plant with seeds in it, hopefully, at some point. And if you grow out a plant with seeds and a plant without seeds, exact same clones, the one without seeds, obviously that's the one that we want. Sensimilia is the Spanish without seeds. Um, but the yield of the one without seeds would be better, and the quality, because it's going to continue to try to make that flower, where this other one, it's going to put all of its energy into finishing up those seeds. So it does.
Well, I know a whole plant, like you're not going to want to smoke or consume an entire plant when it's seeded, but like a non-seeded female plant where just one branch, where you just pollinate one branch, does that dramatically impact the cannabinoid
I
or
feel like
secondary metabolic production on the rest of the plant? Do you know that?
I I don't have any data on it, but when because I'll do that with a watercolor brush and
Yeah.
dab, one or two buds. I feel like the plant always just stops at that point. Like, I'll get flower off of the rest of the plant and it'll be good,
Mhm.
but I feel like it just stops trying to because everything else, because when I'm doing that, everything else in the room I leave alone, and you can see a difference. It's not like it doesn't stall, but it just doesn't progress, because the rest of the plants get chunkier, get better trichomes, and just keep building. I feel like those just kind of stall out there as far as
Okay, so we'll say anecdotally, it
anecdotally,
does
100%.
impact yield.
First
There
thing
you
I
go,
said,
or cannabinoid
zero,
production.
zero data,
All right. All right, some
but
more
I've seen it.
comments.
I've seen it multiple times in a room because it stands out compared to the other ones.
Right on, right on. So yeah, fried piper got some eggs still. Yeah, 1 pound will make up a gallon of liquid solution, and then you're using that at a rate of a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon per gallon. So a pound goes a really long way. It's the most affordable input that you could use in your garden. And you can just store that gallon milk jug of Agsil and just add it in with every watering if you want.
Make sure to add the water, half the water first, then the
Yeah.
powder, then the rest of the water after it's dissolved.
What up, Dogro? Thanks for using our nutrient pack. I'm glad to hear your plants are looking great. I love that. Appreciate the support. Um, Tito asked, do you recommend using a soil EC meter? If yes, can you explain how to properly use it? You want to go, Brandon? You want me to go?
Um, I don't use a specific soil EC meter like the pulse meter, which I is really nice when you've got a bunch of plants to check. For me, just with having a few R&D beds, I just do slurries and use a combination EC pH meter. I have a dry bulb Kelway pH meter that I can just stab into soil and will give me a pH, but I don't have anything that I can just directly plug into the soil. I think they're really useful. We have one that we use internally, and then we have customers that use the pulse meters, and those are great for, one of the first things I ask folks for, especially when they don't have a test in hand, is, can you give me a pH and EC of your soil? Because that's going to tell me a lot. Um, it's important to have it on hand, whether it's just a specific soil EC meter or a combination meter. Is you'll have to determine what's of value to you.
Yeah, we sell the pulse meter, which tells you EC, the electrical conductivity of your soil, and EC directly relates to the fertility of your soil. It's not going to tell you what constitutes that fertility, if it's calcium or magnesium or whatever, but it will tell you a rough idea of how much fertility that soil has in it. So if you have plants, for example, that are showing maybe they're yellowing, or you think you're seeing some sort of deficiency, checking your EC is a great way to figure that out. Like, oh yeah, we're low. we're low on fertility, or oh, we're way too high on fertility. And so the plant's dealing with it's osmotic pressure on the root system, and it's struggling to uptake nutrients because the EC is too high. So it is a useful tool. Does every organic grower need one? Absolutely not. Um, if you want to geek out on it, though, having a way to measure pH and a way to measure EC is really, really nice. So yeah, I like the pulse meter. There's other ones out there. I can't give you recommendations on those, but you can check out the review video I did on the pulse. It's really easy to use. And I like that it works with my phone, and I can take a picture and write notes and correlate them with that reading. So when it gives me my temperature in EC, I can take a picture of the plant at that point in time, and it'll store it by date. And so historically, I can graph it or see a photo that correlates to the plant at that health level, which is kind of cool. So, yeah.
I think you nailed it.
Okay.
It just depends on how deep you want to dive into it, but it's a great tool.
Jared J Bud asks, how long is pollen viable if it was vacuum sealed with a desiccant pack and stored in good conditions?
3 to 6 months. Um, I've heard folks that swear they keep it for a year, but I've just never kept it past 6 months. So
Right on. Okay. All right. I haven't even read the whole question, but I saw it was a question about blue mats. Over time, minerals tend to build up in the emitters. What's the recommended method for removing these deposits and keeping the system running efficiently? Great question.
so it depends on what's building up in them. Peroxide, vinegar. There's all kinds of things that you can use. It just depends on what's building up in them. Um, I'm assuming it's probably calcium because typically folks are running only water through their blue mats, and so that's usually the number one culprit that's leaving deposits. So if you've got hard water, blue mats, drip emitters can be problematic because they will clog up.
You could, if it is calcium, you could soak them in vinegar as a way of dealing with that in between cycles. Um, what I would suggest is getting an irrigation suitability test so you know what's in your water. That's always where I like to start. When I moved into the house I'm at right now, that was the very first thing I did was I sent in a water sample to find out what I would be putting on my garden and if the water was suitable. It's not that expensive, and we have a free blog post that Brandon wrote on our website to help analyze your water test. Or if you want a full analysis from us, it's only, I think, another $30 or so for the analysis, and we can send you a full analysis of your water too. But absolutely worth getting an irrigation suitability test. That will tell you what minerals are building up in the emitters and if your water needs any adjustment or will have an impact on your soil health over time.
Rusty said peroxide also, and Green Table says acids, which vinegar is a really good weak acid that will do that for you.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, you guys are a little ahead of me on the comments because I don't want to miss these questions. All right, this is one I love. Lil Nugs asks, I've always been under the impression we want more fungal activity in flower and more bacterial in veg. Is this true? This is a great question. And this comes out of the soil food web community, with the idea being that um, this is all based off the plant succession chart. And so essentially, Jeff Lowenfels in his book, Team with Microbes, talks about how soils that are newly formed, like just let's just start with rock initially, and then topsoil starts to build over time there, highly bacterial. And so you'll initially get some grasses that will show up, and then over time you'll get some later evolutionary plants, all the way through to old growth forests. And as you work your way from new soil, rock essentially, that's slowly breaking down, creating minerals and mixing with topsoil and organic matter, highly bacterial, to old growth forest, highly fungal, and everything in between, there becomes this idea that because certain plants grow better in certain soils have microbial communities and ratios that we need to try and like control that process to create this environment for our plants. The reality of it, if you ask me, and I don't think this is at all controversial within the actual soil scientist community. Now, I know there's some soil food web people that will push a different message, and I actually did a whole podcast just on this topic. But we know that fungal to bacteria ratios are controlled a lot by the plant based on the exudates that it's putting out. So the plant's photosynthesizing sunlight and releasing up to 70% of that energy from photosynthesis back out the root system as a way of selecting for microorganisms that will create access to nutrients in the soil that it wants. So if it wants manganese or it needs manganese, it's going to select exudates for organisms that will help make that manganese more plant available. And this is fairly well established. The plant really controls that. So the things that control that the most are soil temperature, soil hydrology, so your moisture levels in your soils, and then the plant. So we don't really need to try and control that other than to make sure we're creating an optimal environment for our plants. Um, and make sure that we have adequate fertility. If we do those things, I think we're all set. I don't think we need to mess with fungal and bacterial levels. Also, there's good research that shows that, like I said, hydrology, so water moisture, can dramatically impact fungal to bacterial ratios. We think of these things like the soil as being homogeneous or the soil as being static, but really, inside the soil, we have all these micro environments where there's places that are, very, very high oxygen and aerobic, places that are very low oxygen and anaerobic. Different microorganisms are going to live in those areas. They're going to require different food sources. They're going to be producing different exudates. And this nutrient cycling, this cycle of prey and predation that's continually evolving and changing inside our soils all the time is not something that we need to control. And those fungal to bacteria ratios are constantly changing just by a watering event. Because you got to remember, bacteria is reproducing quite rapidly. In the course of a day, we can have 1 to 2 evolutionary cycles of bacteria occurring. So by the time your cannabis plant is done flowering in that 60 days that it was in flower, we've had successive generations of bacteria and archaea and protists and all these other microorganisms that have been evolving and had, uh, you know, reproduced multiple times and co-evolved with this plant. So, long story short, don't worry about it. I guess that's what I would say. And anyone that tries to sell you on changing your soil's fungal to bacteria ratios or making a complete compost that's going to solve all your issues is really, in my opinion, selling snake oil because it sounds really good. Like we want to mimic nature and we want to do everything through microorganisms. But the reality of it, the research just doesn't support it. Science doesn't support it. And frankly, I've seen a lot of people lose out on an agricultural scale by trying to go down this path and failing miserably. And we've worked with some cannabis facilities that have literally lost multiple crops because they've chased these fungal to bacteria things, and then through these consultants that they found online that sounded really smart, selling this soul food web message. And I've kind of held back from saying this stuff publicly up until more recently because I'm not trying to like rock the boat, but I hate seeing people fail because of a message that's not grounded in science or not grounded in fact and is more of a, I don't know, an ethical or morality message that sounds really good and I don't know, caters to sort of what we want to do as organic growers, but just doesn't work. All right, that was all. I don't know, Brandon, do you have anything to add?
No, you said it. I think Rusty Nails nailed it. It's just
Okay, I haven't gotten down that far. I'm sure I'll
yeah,
get here
yeah,
in a sec, but
yeah. It's just
yeah.
we don't have that control, and we don't need the. I like the Buddhist approach to things like this. If there's nothing we can do, there's nothing to do. So I don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of microorganisms in our soil, or even what Dr. Ingham has done for promoting the soil food web. I think all of that is really incredible, and I love that. But there's been a lot of claims out of that community lately in the last 5, 10 years that just are not true. For example, all soils contain sufficient minerals for growing plants. I mean, that's bullshit. We know that that's not true. And so if we can optimize the chemical properties of a soil by having the right minerals in there, we're going to have a healthier, happier plant. This claim that, you know, healthy plants and, having a good soil food web community will prevent diseases and pathogens from being able to infect your plant is not true. And it sounds great, but it doesn't. The reality of it is just it's just simply not true. And you can ask any entomologist, you can ask any soil scientist or pathologist, and they'll tell you the same thing. But there's certain pockets that have created this image and spread these messages, and I think it's really dangerous. So,
Your
yeah, I
your
don't know.
your
That's all I have
your
to say
dad
on that.
your dad and I were talking bricks just yesterday morning.
Yeah, bricks is a great example of that. Some of the claims around bricks are not factual, and they've been disproven. Yet you see it pop up all the time in these communities. And it's frustrating because then when you do get insects or your crop fails, oh, well, you didn't do it right because you didn't have the right fungal to bacteria ratio. You didn't have the right microbes in place. And so that's the big, out that they use when you don't get the results that you want. So I find it very frustrating. That's one of the reasons I wanted to throw a conference was to get actual scientists and people that I knew would be able to speak, on topics like this. So yeah, I don't know. That's a touchy subject for me. It's a great question, Little Nugs. That's my opinion. Take it or leave it. All right. Oh, this is a good one. Will roly polies eat your leaves in the living soil bed? Absolutely. They will eat them and they will multiply and then they will start eating your plant. How do I know? Because they ate my plants last cycle and it sucked. I had never had an issue with isopods until this last grow cycle indoors. And I've always seen like one or two in my beds, and I thought, oh, cool, they're part of the habitat. And in most cases, that's fine. But in an indoor space, they can definitely take over. And we've had numerous growers complain to me over the years, or us, about roly polies just taking over, and they'll eat the stalk of your plant. They'll actually girdle the plant, and then they just burrow back into the soil, and so you can't really do a lot about them. Um, One of the things you could try mass trapping. So if you put some leaves down there, let the roly polies go to them, and then remove those leaves with the roly polies, that can help reduce the populations. But if you just let them eat the leaves, they're going to keep reproducing, and you're going to have more of an issue. Um, One of the other things I've seen people do is wrap the stalk. You can use like a tree banding glue or duct tape or something around the stalk of the plant to protect the trunk of your plant. Um, Catchmaster also makes these new catch cards. I have one in my office that are picture like those things that you stick on your door to say "Do not disturb." Picture something like that, but a sticky card on one side. So it goes around the plant and will keep anything that crawls up to the stalk will get caught on the sticky card. So that's an option too. But there's no great biological controls for roly polies or isopods. All right. You're gonna take this one, Brand. I've been talking too much. Um, I know you guys aren't big into KN&F, but if making water soluble calcium, calcium acetate, do you have any thoughts on using calcium acetate as a plant available calcium source?
Yes. And I'm going to answer something from the comments real quickly because back to the fungal bacterial, Rusty Nails said adding some mycorrhiza growing weed indoors is fungal enough. And that's totally true. Little Nug says, I don't normally use mycos anymore. And then Rusty Nails came back in and said they're great. It's great to promote initial root growth. I use it to transplant. And just wanted to make a note on that. I do the same. I dust my roots for our, infection at transplant, but you want to make sure that you do that as soon as you possibly can with the plant, because once that plant has access to adequate phosphorus, which hopefully you have in your beds, you probably won't make that infection. So I like to try to make that infection before I go into the bed. So just a side note. And then, it's not that we're not big into KNF. I find KNF really fascinating. I like chemistry, and so I'm always trying to chase what's the actual chemistry going on in KNF. If you're making water soluble calcium, and we do prefer gypsum, because it's not going to do anything to your pH. We know it's safe. It has a really nice release mechanism in the soil, so that don't go crazy with it, but it makes it difficult to over apply. Calcium acetate, the first time somebody asked me about that, the first thing I heard was acetate, and I was like, oh, that can't be good. But I did some research on it, and it's perfectly good for plants. The problems with it are the same problems with any kind of ferment or anything like that, is getting consistent inputs and outputs. But if you're, wanting to run a KNF system, I think that that's a great way to get some calcium. It's not the way that I would do it. I'm sure it's not the way Tad would do it. We would just go in with some gypsum. Just, another thing is just workflow. I think I've got like 4 or 5 full-time jobs, I feel like sometimes, and like I don't have time to go make my calcium. I'm lucky to be in a place where I can purchase some gypsum and just keep moving. But if it's, something that you're interested in, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, calcium is like the cheapest input in your garden too, like pennies, literally, in a lot of cases. So, yeah, I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with it. If you want to experiment with it, that's great. I like that I know exactly how much, based off of a soil test, gypsum or wlastonite or agricultural lime, I'm going to be adding, and I can target something really specifically with it. So I think that's the big reason. So it's not that we're anti KNF. It's just that a lot of what we do is with soil testing, and if we're soil testing, we're not going to recommend setting a product that we don't know consistently what the calcium levels are going to be, because then we can't hit a target. That's the biggest difference, I think. All right, Jamar asks, how do I keep my worms alive in a 4x4 bed if I need a 2-week break before starting next round? Oh, this is an easy one. I don't think you have to do anything, Jeff. I mean, maybe check it and see if the bed's drying out. You can give it a little bit of water to keep them alive, but for 2 weeks, that shouldn't be a problem. Just treat the soil like it has a plant in it in terms of moisture levels, and the worm should be just fine in between cycles.
They'll just move down into the profile if the top inch dries off. So you don't have to worry about it too much.
All right. I'm reading these as we go here. Termites and mulch, like I'm talking about thousands. I added organic mulch from Walmart, but it was on clearance. I've done that kind of thing, not with mulch, but I get it. Not sure if they came in with it, but I was going to go nuclear with nematodes. Do nematodes work with termites? I've never had to deal with termites. Well, first off, I'd start with a positive ID to make sure you actually are dealing with termites and know the species, because with any insect, it always starts with a proper identification. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people misidentify an insect and then go and apply something that's either expensive and not doesn't treat the target insect, or spray something that's not necessarily effective or going to kill it either. So I would start with that, and then figure out what the best option is. But I've never had to deal with termites. Brandon?
I've gotten them. I lost an avocado tree when I was in South Carolina to termites that came in with mulch from Lowe's. So big box stores are not where we should be getting our gardening supplies. I know it's convenient. I've been burned so many times getting soil from those places, but you can use nematodes. Off the top of my head, I don't know which ones, but there are nematodes that are effective in getting rid of termites in the soil. It's not going to do anything if they're in your house, but you can get them out of a bed with that. I don't know how many times you'd have to apply it or anything like that, but if you'll email me, I'll look around, see if I can't find
Yeah, as I
something
say,
for
email
you.
Brandon and we can see it because we can source insects for folks through BioBee. So if there is a commercially viable nematode that would work or another biological control agent, we can track it down and get you a good price on it.
Yeah, I know that there are nematodes that are productive with termites. I just can't remember which one. And they'll
All
kill stuff like
right.
termite.
All right. I'm just catching up on questions. Okay. Recently purchased a soil test, but the plants are currently blowing me away. My question is there an expiration date on the test? No. Feel free to hold on to that test until you're ready to use it. Shouldn't be an issue at all.
Nope.
Short of a world apocalypse, you can hold on to that test as long as you want.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, okay, that's a Bakashi comment, but that's a different Brandon, I think.
it is.
Um, Started foldering the lab. All right, they're talking about labs. Sorry, I'm just catching up on questions here, guys. Apologies. There's a lot of chats going on. Okay, here's another question. I love that you guys are chatting too. That's awesome. I have to get through it to get to the questions. All right, Don asks, how can different amendments affect taste?
That's so it depends on how they're being applied. Obviously, any foliar is, you know, potentially, in flower would, very much impact the flavor. But if I'm understanding the question correctly, I'm assuming they mean putting a dry amendment or a liquid amendment into the soil. How would that affect taste? And so the important element to think about there is sulfur, and we want to make sure that we've got adequate sulfur in our soil so that we can make the esters, alcohols, terpenes, all your volatiles that make your finished flower taste and smell good. So you would want to make sure that you had adequate sulfur. You would want to make sure that your nitrate was not elevated, because then you'll get that chlorophyll flavoring instead of the terpenes that we're after. Kind of masks that. Um, but I don't think, like, if you put in like, let's use crustacean meal. If I put crustacean meal in, it's not going to give me fishy terpenes. It is going to stimulate biology, which is going to stimulate terpenes, but it's all going to be, to my benefit.
Yeah, first and foremost, genetics are going to play the biggest role in how your plant tastes and finishes. That's the biggest, most important thing. The second would be I would say your environment. So, a combination of light, CO2, temperature, humidity, moisture in the soil, biology in the soil, and then the nutrient profile of the soil. So it's very complicated. And to further complicate all of this, stimulus or stress events, which I actually just did a podcast with Dr. Jose Leme talking about this. He just finished some research on water restriction, which is a stress event, or what a lot of people will call crop steering, also increases the production of secondary metabolites. As we increase the production of cannabinoids and secondary metabolites, terpenes and cannabinoids, we are potentially reducing our yields as we create these stimulus or stress events. So it's a little bit of a delicate dance as to where that plant puts its energy. Um, but the amendments can affect taste in that if they are not properly balanced, like Brandon said, if we have too little sulfur or too much nitrogen, those will impact directly, potentially the terpene expression or the taste of the plant too. Um, but it's pretty complicated, and there's still a lot we're learning about all this. We don't know where optimally to create these triggers yet, to get a result that we want either. So, and it may not be the same across all of cannabis because the genetic diversity in cannabis is so great. So, yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have the best answer.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover.
All right. If I set up my Blumat system at 77 degrees Fahrenheit and it later reaches 104 degrees Fahrenheit, does it adjust automatically or need manual changes? Greenbox, I'm not sure I understand this question because if I assume temperature is water, and if your water is 104, you're going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah,
So
this is I have to assume outdoors someplace.
yeah, the Blumat system doesn't adjust by temperature, it adjusts by moisture. The moisture is stuck inside the ceramic cone, and so
You think they
I
mean
don't
77 millibars and then it goes up to 104 as it's drying out instead of degrees Fahrenheit? That would make more sense.
that could make sense. Yeah, so it will add water to maintain at whatever level you set it.
Yeah. So if it dries out some, if it jumps from 80 to 100 and it's drying out, it should head back towards 80 or wherever you set it. It should
Yeah.
stay very close to that. You shouldn't have big swings. You can in certain areas of your bed, and then you might want to adjust where your carrots are.
All right. I'm starting to catch up with comments. Mycorrhizal fungi, there's a whole blog post on our website that I wrote years ago about mycorrhizal fungi. So if you want to do a deep dive on it, you can go read there. One thing I will say is it's a root symbiont. It's a very specific type of fungus. There are a lot of other types of fungus, specifically more, typically saprophytic fungi in the soil that are not mycorrhizal. So mycorrhizal are ones that form direct relationships with the root of your plants, whereas there's a lot of other fungal species in your soil that literally just help break down organic matter and transport nutrients and create little subway systems in the soil and create soil structure and all these things that are not mycorrhizal fungi. So I just want to just let you guys know there are a lot of, just like there's a lot of different types of bacteria, there's a lot of different types of fungus. And so it's not like, that's why, and I haven't found the perfect way of stating this, but we're looking at something from so far away and trying to understand it. It's like saying all humans are this. Um, and we're creating these like giant categories that I just don't think are useful because there's so much diversity in there. We're just looking at it from way too far away. So, if we want to talk about and measure the amount of desolubilizing bacteria in a soil, that could be a useful tool for telling how available phosphorus might be in my plant. But just looking at overall bacteria, it doesn't really tell us all that much information necessarily. So,
And it always, for me, always goes back to we, even if we did know, we're not in a position where we can control that anyway. Not at this time.
um, I agree with Rusty here about not chopping and dropping. I think it is a pathogen vector. So yeah, I that's one of the reasons we don't do it. So yeah, I just want to throw that up there. Um, okay, here we go. Thrips in final weeks of flower. If I spray onion, garlic, ginger, black pepper, and cayenne, while you're raiding the kitchen here, will it leave residue on buds even if I spray with water later on?
Yes.
Well, okay, few thoughts. One, thrips typically not of economic importance in that yes, it's going to mess up your leaves. It sucks. It's going to stress the plant, but you're still going to get a viable bud at the end of the cycle, most likely. Um, and feel free to correct me on anything, Brandon, as we go. But as cannabis pests go, it's not the worst in that regard. There are things that you could do to treat them. I don't know that this is the approach I would take, especially in the few weeks left of flower. You probably don't want to be spraying anything. So if you know for sure it's thrips, I'd probably write it out, um, depending on how bad the damage is. Now, for next cycle, I think what I would look at is coming in with some SF nematodes. Brandon, I know there's a couple different mites that Suzanne recommends. You could do also A dunk?
Swirsky nematode, the SF nematodes, doing a heavy defoliation. You want to get something like the nematodes into your soil. You can do Bovaria drenches in your soil as well, because the Bovaria won't hurt your nematodes. They're a really nice combination for thrips. Anything that pupates in the soil. But I definitely would not be spraying onion, garlic, and ginger. I mean, it sounds delicious, but I wouldn't put it on a bud. Um, yeah, I would skip that. I would defoliate. I would get something into the soil to start breaking the reproductive cycle. And then once you get, healthy veg plants back in there, spinosad is your friend. I'm a big fan of Epishield, Suff Oil, things like that, but I, spinosad's the way to go for thrips, 100%.
Yeah, so for next cycle, you can dip your cuttings in a diluted solution of either Suff Oil X, which is the Monterey horticultural oil. You can get that on Amazon or Home Depot, Lowe's, those kinds of stores will carry it. Or there's this new product out, Epishield, and I like to have both because they have slightly different modes of action. And the Epishield, um, actually, I don't even know if I've even told you this, Brandon. They're releasing an
Yep.
organic version, Epishield O, starting next month. So it's removing the sodium lauryl sulfate, and then um, let's see what else. Yeah, so you can do a dip with those. You can do sprays all through veg as needed. But what I did, and I'm not gonna say I eradicated thrips, but I got them under control, and I didn't see any the next cycle. Was the simidesmite, the SF nematodes, and then well, I did a really good dunk in the Suff oil for the new clones that I got, and then I did those two things,
30
the
mils,
mites.
30 milliliters
Yeah,
per.
I think so. I'd have to go back and look. We can get people rates if they want, though. And then I did the SF nematodes, and that worked phenomenally well. So, yeah, last cycle it was crazy. I didn't have anything on my sticky cards. They sat up there the whole flowering cycle, and I got maybe like two flies in there, and they were like not even related to my plants. They're just stuff that came into the room when I opened the door. Uh, Felt really good. I've never had that clean of a cycle before. All right. Reggie said DIY earth box. This is Reggie. We got to get rid of these hyphens. DIY earth box with 10 gallons of soil and a 5-gallon reservoir. Tap water is slightly high pH. Should I lower the water pH? And then if so, is apple cider vinegar or citric powder good for the job? Um, Okay, so real quick, without an irrigation suitability test, we don't know what's creating the pH or what the alkalinity of the soil is. That's the ability to adjust the pH of the water, and that's the important metric to know, because you may have high pH, but you may have very low alkalinity, in which case doesn't really matter. You don't need to worry about it whatsoever. Also, the acids that you're listing here are both pretty weak acids. They're not going to maintain the pH in a reservoir for very long. So using them is not doing you a lot of good. Um, so that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, totally agree. We need to know the alkalinity to know if your pH, and when you say a little bit high, what is that? We're looking for a range 6.8 to 7 is optimal. But you could be, 7, 8, 8.0 and have really low alkalinity and be totally fine. Or you could be really close and have horrible alkalinity and be out of range real quickly. So alkalinity is always the other half of that conversation. And I would want to use phosphoric acid, something that would, especially in a sip, just because you need that reservoir to stay. You don't want it swinging back and forth.
All right, we know Rusty's a regular on these things. I'm going to push back a little bit on this one, Rusty. When you say targets are for soil targets are for commercial, um, what I would say is if you're buying a commercial soil, like you're paying money for someone to make soil for you, they should have done soil testing and they should share that test. And those tests should be targeted for the crop that you are growing. I think that's really important because some of these tests that I see online from some of these other companies are not optimal for plants. I mean, I see ones with very high levels of ammonium, low levels of nitrates, which tell me that they didn't take the test at the proper time to get a good result or really know what your nitrogen levels are. I've seen tests with very, suboptimal pH. So that's where I think targets are important. And then, on terms of cost or why I think soil testing is still important, I have two 4x4 beds in my room. That's gonna cost me $90 to get it tested and get a result. Now, once I have that test result, it's probably gonna cost me $20 or less to actually amend those beds based off the recommendation. The amount if I bought, gypsum, alfalfa meal, um, I don't know, some of those the usual things that we like to keep in our pantry and had those on hand, um, I can re-amend my bed for pennies or probably under $10. So that soil test is saving me a ton of money on fertilizer. I'm not buying products I don't need, and um, it's saving me on not over applying or under applying those fertilizers. Because when you buy a product like a grow formula or a bloom formula and you go to apply it to a soil where you don't know what your starting point is, you're just guessing. And that's not something that I want to do with a really high value crop, whether that's for my own medical or for commercial. So I know this is an unfair format to have this conversation, Rusty, because I get
Right?
to say whatever I want and you only have the comments. So I want to acknowledge that, but that's my reason why I think soil testing can still make sense for home growers, and we have a lot of home growers that do soil tests. So
Yep.
um, it just depends, but you absolutely don't have to. Your point is valid. I just wanted to throw a counterpoint to your comment because I thought it was an interesting topic.
Yeah, I think targets are for optimizing, and so, we kind of had the same kind of conversation last week with Rusty um, about home growers don't need the testing, and because they don't need to be consistent. And I pushed back saying I feel like if you want to get data along with cannabis, yeah, you should. Um, yeah, so home grows KN&F, that stuff does work fine for home growers. And again, it just really depends on how much information you want, how much you want to be involved with the plant and that kind of thing. And I've got friends that have never done a soil test in their life and will never do a soil test in their life, and they grow really nice weed. They've got great genetics and they grow good weed. We're trying to push this. For somebody like myself, I've been growing for over 4 decades, and 20 years ago, if I had organic targets, I'd have done just about anything for them. So for somebody like me who likes the math and likes the data, it's a different path.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
will add
you can still grow
if
you can still grow weed without testing. It's just there's two
oh yeah,
roads in
we
the
did for
forest.
years.
Two roads in
Yeah,
the forest. You can do however. There's lots of roads
yeah.
in the
I
forest.
I will say if you don't have the budget to or don't want to soil test, you can still do a pH reading and you can get an EC reading as a way of getting a rough idea of what your fertility is left. It's not going to tell you like, oh, I have way too much sodium or way too many chlorides in my soil or my nitrogen is too high. But it can give you an idea of where your EC is to say, okay, I might be in the right range for fertility right now. Or my pH is at least in a range where I know the plant's not going to have to work too hard to get access to what nutrients are there. So there are little things you can do even if you're not soil testing.
Just to add one more thing to this conversation and just to lead credence to Rusty's point. Um, you and I were talking about the other day about how important it is to get the voices of the people. Just because somebody doesn't have a degree or a doctorate or some sort of alphabet soup behind their name doesn't mean that everybody on this is qualified to do their own research. You are a
Yeah.
scientist. Some of the most important, who was it, Billings, who built his own telescope. I think he was a mailman. There's all these really important scientists that did all these really cool things Um, and they weren't trained. They had no education in that thing. They were just curious, and I think everybody here is curious. That's why they're spending an hour with these two idiots on a Tuesday. Um,
Yeah.
so I appreciate what you're saying, Rusty, and I agree. And I think, like we always say, there's a million ways to skin this cat, and just find the one that you like and works for you.
Yeah, well said. I think this industry lifts up a lot of idiots as well as a lot of really smart people. And so just because someone can put something up on camera, ourselves included, I think you should take everything with a grain of salt and vet it. I think it's important.
Yep.
All right, we're going to go fast. Cake in a cup. I have to read the comments to get to the questions. If you put the word question in caps, it makes it much easier for me to just see which ones are questions. But I love that everyone's chatting in there. Just want to throw that out there as quick feedback. Bruno, yes, all of our lives. If you go to our YouTube page for KiS Organics, there is, I think it's broken up by like videos, lives, and then shorts. And so you can go through and see all of our content. All of our previous lives are on there too. So yeah, feel free to check it all out. Along with, just in case anyone doesn't know, we do have a podcast called Cannabis Cultivation and Science. We are, I think, 6 seasons in, 6 years now of doing it. A lot of great content on there. That's actually how Brandon found out about our company and started working for us. We've had a lot of really amazing people, with the idea being to connect, bridge the gap between science and cannabis cultivation and help dispel some of the myths that we see out in the industry. So, yeah, thank you for the question. It is 3 o'clock. Let me scroll here and see if there's any last questions. Oh, this is a fast one. Don't mix them together. Apply the mycorrhiza directly to the plant roots. Add the compost tea as a soil drench or a foliar over the top as a different application.
Dark water. Nailed it.
Cool. All right. I don't have time to get to the rest of these questions, but I
Five,
appreciate you
five,
guys. I will read them after.
yeah, 519. Email me about the bud rot. I got you.
All right, and tune in next week. It'll be
Yeah.
Brandon and Dr. Ben Higgins, and we can tackle any of the questions we didn't get to today. Really appreciate you guys. Hope to see some of you at the conference.